Well, hello there, everybody. Labor Day weekend already crazy, isn't it? Which means we're inching towards fall. We've talked about that a few times by now, right? You've probably talked about it and thought about it, but it also means for me personally, it's football season. I've been a football official for almost 25 years, I think, somewhere in that range. And I had a first this year that I just want to tell you a little bit about. I had my first ever game that ended with a game-winning field goal, or close. I think there was 3 seconds left. And it was a game that a team came all the way back from a 21-0 deficit and hit that game-winning field goal, and it was an amazing victory. The jubilation in those boys as they chased across the field to celebrate as soon as they won the game when the last second ticked off the clock was an awesome sight. And victory is something that's just it's a cool thing to experience. It's a hard thing when you're on the opposite side of that, though, too. But this week, as Rick took us through the beginning of chapter 24, we really see an amazing victory, right? The time that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, it makes a football game minute in comparison. And I just want to touch base just a little bit about some of the things that we saw that Rick took us through in the sermon out of Luke 24. The first is as those women showed up at the tomb. As you remember from chapter 23, they prepared their burial spices and all the things that they were going to do to honor their friend Jesus as he was buried, put in that tomb. And they went there on that Sunday morning, the day after they celebrated their Sabbath, prepared to do that. And outside of the tomb, they meet up with 2 men. Imagine, if you would, how the 2 men are described in clothes that gleamed like lightning, a supernatural appearance to them. And it says, in their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, and the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, he has risen." Those are words that start to get the women and really us to understand the victory that Jesus had over death, and really the victory that we could have because our sins have been forgiven and he has conquered death and given us life. Why do you look for the living among the dead? Those men said. And so those women ran. They too were celebrating. They couldn't believe what they just saw, and they ran across town or some distance to get to the disciples, to Peter and to John, who had to go see it for themselves, this victory that they were able to see. And then Rick also took us through those disciples that weren't among the 12, but were among the greater multitude of disciples that knew and followed Jesus, that were on their way to Emmaus. They were leaving town, 7 miles they had traveled, and all of a sudden this man comes up to them who happens to be Jesus. They just don't know it at the time, and he takes them through everything about him that was seen in the Old Testament, the stories that they were familiar with. And they get to the point then of walking with him, journeying with him for a while, and they sit down and eat a meal with him. And as Jesus is breaking the bread, their eyes are opened, Luke describes, and they recognized him. And at that moment, Jesus disappeared from their sight. I don't know how that exactly worked, but it would have been an amazing thing. And they took themselves and they recognized it as well, the victory that they all of a sudden had, that their friend, this guy, Jesus, was again a victor over death. And so they too ran. They got back to Jerusalem as soon as they could, and they met with Simon and they told him, "It's true, the Lord has risen and he's appeared to Simon as well." And so the women shared their victory. The men came back to Jerusalem and sat with the disciples, and together they celebrated and tried to think through what that victory meant. An amazing picture of real victory. And then I just want to touch base on a victory that we got to experience as a church family. Hopefully, many of you were there. We had a great crowd turnout for our baptism on Sunday after church. We celebrate in an amazing way 20 people that came forward to be baptized, that came forward to profess that what had already taken place in their heart, that they had a faith in Jesus Christ, that they wanted the world to know, to be aware of the change that he had made in their life, the victory that they personally knew that we could celebrate with together. What an amazing celebration that we had, a victory celebration. And then we also joined in together for a picnic, a great picture as well of what God is doing in our church and in our community as a result of the work that he's doing in our church. And I'm so glad that you're a part of it in whatever way it is. If you're an online viewer with us that lives out of town, if you're a supporter of our church, if you're serving right now, God is doing amazing things. He is the one who gets the credit for it. And we're grateful for what we're seeing, really a victory and a victory and a victory time and time again. God's an amazing God doing amazing things in individuals and in our church family. And we're really glad that you are a part of that as well. So we will see you this weekend, our last weekend of having 2 services. And then we kick back to our regular fall schedule after Labor Day, where we'll go to 1 service at 9. Look forward to catching up with you. Have a great Labor Day weekend.